astrology became banned.
Right, right.
We don't see the role of women because Saul was the original misogynist.
Right, right,
You know,
and that's
said,
reflected in the Bible.
very much so.
Mothers are whores, that's kind of where...
Yeah, and you know, women must be seen and not heard and all this sort of business. Whereas we know from the few texts we do have about the Church of Jesus and James that Mary Magdalene, of course, was the senior disciple.
That's right.
And hence we have this slightly new discussion, but it is an old discussion about whether Mary Magdalene was in the Last Supper scene.
Right, and we're going to get into that, the whole lineage of Jesus. Actually, we're going to separate that out and do a second interview, so we'll keep people on the line a bit here, won't we? But not intentionally, it's just that there's so much more to cover here. It's out of the Old Testament. So if you can continue on what you were saying, and then also let's get into the temple at Jerusalem. I don't know if that's a non sequitur and we should just jump there right now, but what would you prefer?
Yes. Well, let's go back to the building of the Temple of Jerusalem. So that's going back to the United Monarchy era of David and King Solomon. As we were saying before, they can't be found in the historical records, so where were they? And having spoken so much about Egypt, well, let's look at them from the Egyptian perspective. And obviously we're not going to find those names within the historical record, because otherwise they would have been found already.
Right.
People would have known about them. So what we're looking for is a couple of attributes that are central to the United Monarchy story. And that is King David, who was known as, well, he was primarily known for the city and the star. The city of David and the star of David. And these are two very, very important shibboleths of his reign. And so what we're looking for is something similar within the Egyptian record. And of course, if we look in exactly the same era as King David, we find a pharaoh from Lower Egypt, again, the Hyksos, who was known for the city and the star. And his name was Pasipa Kahanimut, or Susannes in the Greek version. And his name actually has the city glyph and the star glyph, BC. Now, if someone today was rummaging around near the Dead Sea and they entered a cave and found this pot with his book in it, which was called the Bible, they would be going through every single last letter and sentence in this book, trying to find real history. But because the Bible has religious baggage attached to it, the Egyptologists and even the archaeologists from Israel won't really touch it.
Right.
It's almost taboo for them because it's religious. But it's not, it's a historical text. And it's a historical text that has come straight out of ancient history. Now, they try to deflect this by saying, oh, you know, these were just poor shepherds, and therefore it's a big oral tradition, and therefore a lot of the history will be garbled, you know, with Chinese whisper syndromes and all the rest of this business. But no, it wasn't. These were pharaohs. They would have had scribes. It would not have been an oral history. This was a written history that came from Abraham, who I say was Pharaoh Mount Abram, and from Jacob, who I say was Pharaoh Jacob. And that's something they don't tell you about, that there was a Pharaoh from northern Egypt who was called Jacob, Jacobah. So in this new guise, it's no longer an oral history of a few Bedouin floating around with half a dozen starving sheep. We now have the Bible as being the day book. Within Egypt, within the royal court, and they probably still do the same now, I don't know, but the royal court in Egypt used to keep a day book, a diary. And this was a diary of the royal court. The trivia, the main events, everything that was going on within the royal court was recorded in the day book. Trivia, the main events, everything that was going on within the royal court was recorded in the day book. So essentially what I'm saying is the Bible is the day book of the Hyksos pharaohs of Lower Egypt.
Which gives it a whole
whole
other
new spin.
level of importance.
Absolutely, and it also means that it is not an oral history, it was a written history. They would have had the scribes, and so it could well be an exact history of what happened in that era. So instead of being mythology, now we're saying it is 100% historical fact, if you can understand what it was saying. So, you know, these things we've been talking about before, you know, when we're talking about sheep and bulls, we're actually talking about Apis bull worship and sheep Aries worship.
Right.
The cult, hence the Shepherd Kings, of course. This is why they were called the Shepherd Kings, because Aries was the dominant constellation at that time. That's why they were called the Shepherd Kings.
Well, even the word Hyksos itself has two meanings.
It does, yes. A lot of people will say it doesn't mean Shepherd King, but clearly Josephus and Manetho said it does mean Shepherd King. And the giveaway there is that it's spelt with the shepherd's crook. And so we can see it has a connection with shepherds. Josephus and Manetho said it does mean Shepherd King. And the giveaway there is that it's spelt with the shepherd's crook. And so we can see it has a connection with shepherds. In actual fact, the word is Haikal Kasut, which tends to mean, well, Egyptologists will say that it means the kings of the foreign lands, but it doesn't. The literal translation is Haikal Kasut, the kings of the mountains. But I've retranslated that because that really doesn't make much sense. That's why they say it's foreign, because there's no mountains in Egypt, and therefore anything to do with mountains has to be foreign. No, because this particular glyph is used in many things that are purely Egyptian, so it doesn't mean foreign. So what does Kasut mean? What's these mountains? And of course, the big sacred mountains of Egypt are going about back again to King Solomon and the Star of David. The mountains, the sacred mountains of Egypt were the pyramids.
Right.
And so they were the Haikal Kasut, they were the kings of the pyramids, the kings of Giza, the people who ruled over the most sacred monument within Egypt. The Giza pyramids, of course, were not tombs. We're not talking about tombs here. The pyramids, the ancient pyramids, the megalithic pyramids, had nothing to do with being tombs. They were cathedrals, perhaps. You know. That's a much better way of looking at it.
Some say observatories.
Observatories, well, it had a huge great observatory on top of the Great Pyramid. So, yes.